architecture school in America, and they say that everything that you end up doing as an architect is what you learned at school. When I was at school, I was single and I was clubbing a lot. And I was probably quite obsessed about sex, and this may well have kind of somehow led to certain fascinations that I have. So that my thesis project was kind of to do with clubbing. I was going a lot, really. I used a piece of music, a trance track that I happen to love, to generate a piece of architecture. It's a lot about that period of architecture where we're starting to generate stuff from code. So I took this piece of music, I dissected it into various tracks. I then injected it into a site to create this strange office nightclub hybrid, where the argument was that people who go to work are actually having fun in some way. They're going there to socialize, and that's where they're going to meet their future partner. Whereas people that go clubbing or working out are actually doing work. You know, there's a huge blur between them. So this building was intended to be a sort of space for the two to meet, and this music then generated this topography. The music lines, the sections, the frequencies of each instance of music, actually kind of laying out sections which then wrapped around this sort of spiral building, which then oozed into its site, creating this sort of topography where you could either work at the same time on sort of acoustically hard surfaces or actually play on kind of softer surfaces. And when I had my final crit, I hadn't slept for about a week. I was just completely exhausted. I think I was lying down on the ground, just not really recognizing that life was still continuing. And the woman who was my main critic turned around to me and she said, "This is all about sex, isn't it?" And I was kind of like really annoyed. But then it sort of started to make me think that kind of maybe it is. I don't know why. I photoshopped in these naked people, you know, crawling around, and nothing to do with their office workspace in New York City, which is sort of my condition. These girls were sort of having oral sex in the corner while these guys were sort of corporately hidden in the floor trusses. So she may have been onto something. So I was just gonna, I noticed here, this is great, isn't it? Architecture is important to us because people need it. It says, well, you know, there are other things I think people need as well, and they may well intersect with the topic of the evening, which is sex. So why space is a matter of sex? I went recently with Sinead to hear Alain de Botton introduce his book, which is fantastic. It's slightly prurient. I don't know if you know it. Has anyone read it already? It sort of slightly ends with this sort of idea that maybe we need to actually have censorship in order to function, which I don't really agree with. But there is a question. I mean, it's not necessarily totally obvious what is sex. You know, is it a verb? Well, I mean, if it's a verb, then it's all about changing the gender of horses, which is a bit weird. Or is it a noun? So I googled sex, just sort of see what comes up, kind of thing. This is what comes up. You know, it's all quite safe in a way. So let's go to the first image. It doesn't look like sex to me. It's a guy talking about sex ed. Next image, there's a woman asleep on a bed. The guy is clearly fucking the bed, not her. They're both wearing underpants. This woman's also asleep, and he's kind of kissing her, but they're not doing anything really. This woman's holding up someone else's legs. This is the fourth image. This is just in sequence. These guys are kind of doing something. You can't really see it, but the woman's not actually kissing. He hasn't got his mouth open. He's not. There's no things that you just generally associate with sex. This is the 13th image. You know, so it's showing the bladder. It's showing, you know, urinary functions. I mean, this isn't my idea of sex. George Michael's the 14th image. This is the 15th. He's not really with someone, you know. It doesn't seem like a partnership there. This woman's with an alien. It's the next image. And she's asleep. These guys are just hugging. So it's like, where's the sex? This woman's just lying in bed with a black photoshopped mouth and black eyeballs. This is seriously in sequence. I mean, I wish I could show you. These guys, I don't know what he's doing. But this woman, she's with the girl. I don't know if this is some kind of Google word scan of like, what's a cock, you know? This turns out to be an image from a little article saying sex change chicken. This chicken apparently changes sex. So this is the next image, you know, another piece of meat. So interesting. So you've got to go to Wikipedia because clearly Google's not really helping you. So you go to Wikipedia and eventually this will come up. In biology, sexual reproduction is a process, that sounds okay, maybe, combining and mixing genetic traits, often resulting in the specialization of organisms. You sort of think that might say orgasms, but it says organisms, into a male or female variety, each known as a sex. Doesn't really sound quite right, combining specialized cells or gametes kind of thing. But it does mention reproduction, which is suddenly, for me, a massive alarm bell. Obviously, I'm calling photocopies the whole time, because I'm an architect and we have to reproduce drawings. But actually, in a way, this is what architecture is about. Architecture is a kind of act of sex, of kind of creating something that we're reproducing across the landscape. You look at all of the cities that you know, it's all about reproduction in some way. It's all about the act of making something, cross-fertilizing the genetic code of a building, and then actually creating this organism that we might know of as a city. So, for instance, when we designed a city outside of Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, we're very concerned with how we write that code, the sort of genetics of this city, which is how it would reproduce across the site. We would implant a little bit of a seed somewhere, but it would then continue to spawn across the site. It would be analysing slopes, it would be creating cells, it would be growing little courtyard spaces. This is part of the city which is covered in solar cells. It's all about energy conservation. And inside, what's quite curious, this is a certain regime it's for. Everyone's alone, it's back to that Google image, no one's actually having sex at all. But there's this idea somehow that reproduction is a core act, it's a core functionality of sex, and of course it's a core act of architecture itself. The other Wikipedia definition, which you get referred to, not just the sort of more biological one, says this. This act is primarily about sexual intercourse with humans. It helpfully refers you elsewhere if you're not interested in humans. It mentions the word intromission, which I've never heard of before. It doesn't actually exist. I don't know why it comes up second. And then it also mentions that it's sexual intercourse as a copulation, whatever, refers to the insertion of a male's penis into a female vagina for the purpose of sexual political reproduction. Fairly limited definition. Helpfully they then expanded later on, allowing for heterosexual, homosexual pairings, very euphemistic, or more than two partners. And what I love about this, do you see that in order to illustrate the multitude of partners, they have a multitude of footnotes, as if the footnotes are sort of like in the bed with the partners kind of thing. This is great. So I think there's some aspect of architecture in which it is actually about recreating the womb, about this sort of endless dream of return. The womb, of course, is our very first architecture, the thing that we are sort of suspended in, that provides all of our services. There's an aspect of architecture which is all about nurturing the body, and sort of providing a kind of repose for our dreams. And in one way, for architects, the ultimate dream is designing houses. We do a little bit of houses. This is a house up in Stoke Newington, and it's funny, it comes to me now, I didn't even realise before, it's called the woven nest. And of course the nest is some kind of sense of a womb, it's like a human womb of some sort. This is a sort of staircase for actually lying on in all kinds of different positions, and I wasn't thinking of this at the time, but when we filmed it I got dancers in, I don't know why, it was a sort of intuitive thing that they travelled all around the body. One of them happened to be a cat, going back to the animal behaviour thing. Some of them were kind of parading their bodies all throughout, but there was this slight sense that the building is sculpted for the human body. It's a sort of ergonomic massage, it's carrying you through and always sort of very aware of your delineants. The stair is just hidden under there, a desk is sort of tucked up on top of it, peeling outside to become a bench, which then becomes a bath. Here they are sort of tucking into all of the various positions. The bath then becomes the bed. So there's always a sort of positioning of bodies against bodies a little bit, this slight titillation of how do a couple live and how do they see each other. He can lift up the flap or she can to have a bit of privacy, or they can actually keep the bathroom open. In the shower too, there's this sort of slight choreography of the two together. There's a seat for the other person to sit opposite the person who's actually having the shower. Other spaces, this project we called sensualscaping, again a bathroom for positioning the body in various relations, the library, it's all extremely sort of sensual and sort of oozing and organic. It was for a gardener actually, and the building is oozing out into the actual surrounding landscape, tucking around behind trees. There was a staircase which sort of became a real celebration of human movement as the body flowed up it. Quite simply constructed actually, out of simple digital fabrication which allowed a whole load of detail. But that staircase is essentially about celebrating the movement of the human body. There's some aspect about architecture also being about enjoying circulation. Architecture is not sculpture, it's got to be inhabited, people have got to move through it, they've got to lubricate it, so there's this sort of sense of passage, of corridors moving everywhere, the idea that there is a sort of heart to a building and that it's actually, you're always flowing through it. It's interesting that a vampire, someone who loves blood, is conceived of as someone who's incredibly sexualized. Vampires are sort of overly sexualized somehow. So there's this sense of, there's always this metaphor of blood moving through a building, which sort of seems to imply liveliness. This is actually a real proposal by someone, a different form of kind of blood being important in certain areas. And I think in a lot of our work there's this attempt to enjoy the movement of bodies. This is a little installation where it projects your outline as you move into space with a series of particles which then create this little shroud around you as you're moving. So we get all of these dancers sort of writhing around on the floor. There's other projects which do the same thing. Project Cutty Sark Station hasn't happened, which is all about celebrating the movement of people throughout the station, allowing their movements to actually illuminate the station, which is dark until they actually move through it. So we're using thermal imaging cameras. As they pulse through the station then selectively illuminates. And just generally capturing people's gestures, another installation which uses Kinect cameras to activate a series of hairs around the body, so that as you move your arm in space, that pixel, which is caught by a camera, is then turned into a three-dimensional object. It sort of becomes a cast with little lights at the end, where you're creating a sort of videographic cast. I'm almost done. This guy, when you go back one slide, this guy wiping his hands, has just installed something which we're not allowed to show at all, but it was quite funny, next slide, where when we actually put it on board, it's part of a boat. This thing in the middle is called a cleat, and it's for an Italian who thought this was hilarious because they thought we were talking about something else entirely, but it's sort of slightly over-sexualized, and this is part of the interior. But again, not intentional, but there's maybe some kind of desire in it all to create this kind of hugely orgiastic sense for a kinesthetic immersion for people. Another project, mapping the human body. Here, integrating little massage needles, and very conveniently for a little couch which had all forms of technology, because it was the underside of your desk, and it was for when you were sleeping in work and you're very bored and you just need a little rest, and your boss isn't really that bothered because they tipped you around, put you on the underside of this desk, and then someone else can use the desk as you sleep and recharge, because of course you're then much more functional that way. So then, finally, just wrapping up a little bit, a project for the future workspace. This is for the Urban Time project at Tent London, a competition we won. It was done on holiday actually, while I was having quite a good time in Greece, and it was for packing a whole load of bodies into a space at all kinds of different positions. You can see here, some of those bodies are doing quite weird things. I hadn't really thought about it, but when you look down here, or you look up there, if I kind of, if I zoom in a little bit, like that person up there, is, I hadn't really sort of thought about it, but you know, it was happening. So some of these bodies are doing slightly suspicious things, which definitely does happen at work. I mean, that's one of the functions of work. And this whole thing had to be kind of rapidly assembled and was brought to site, put up in 48 hours. At the top I had the biggest bed of any workspace, a huge foam kind of comforter, and this is it being rebuilt in Hong Kong. And then a tiny little central installation in the Eastern Canal waterways that we did last summer, where we built a little bit of detached parkland that you could then go and lounge on as you sort of drifted through the East End waterways, with more than one footnote if you wanted to, kind of thing. And it's all about enjoying people, an installation which is mapping out their movement inside the Architectural Association and turning them into light. And I think this is the last project finally here. Sorry, I'm just going to skip through because I know Hege's like, get the fuck on with it. This is a project I run called Latitudinal Cuisine, which I talked about last time I was here. This is my final project, Hege. Honestly, 3 seconds. We scan the world and we eat all of the food of the world in 360 days, 360 degrees, 360 days. We move east a degree a day. And it's kind of the architecture of people, a little bit. People bringing their own food and making a new sort of form of society, which is sort of bottom-up, creative, people thinking about all of the countries that they're cooking from. This is it on the Great British menu. It's all about people somehow finding an avatar for expressing who they are. We've done it in all kinds of places, from homes to warehouses, set up huge tables, done it outside in gardens or on boats that we've made, or telematically connecting Barcelona in grungy streets where garbage trucks come up right behind us, or in art galleries. And the thing we're doing for the Olympics, that you should all come along to if you feel like it, somewhere in Stratford, we don't know where, we're going to build a 15 metre long, 6 metre wide, 2.5 metre tall table to seat 75 people from all the contours of the world. You're going to sit in the sea under -500, you're going to eat off of the zero level of the ocean, of the coastline, and you're going to sit in front of mountains, and you're going to navigate as a sort of flight path through all of the foods of the world on this enormous thing. Here are people gathered around this kind of vast contour thing. That's the Himalayas there. There's some poor guy sitting opposite the Himalayas just here. You can see through it. It's thin slices of aluminium. And we're going to perforate this table with all the cities of the world so that people are sort of connected back to the country that they possibly came from. I've been Alex Orr, and I'm on Atmos. Thanks very much.